Now we've learned the basics of the template fundamentals, we're actually going to look at some Angular directives and some expression transformation using pipes in this next section. So in this first video, we are going to look at something called an ngIf. Now you've probably seen an ngIf out in the wild, or at least the concept of showing or hiding something based on a particular expression. So let's imagine I have a drop-down menu that's JavaScript driven, I click on that, it then expands. So this is typically a show and a hide behavior based on a particular expression. So this is something that we could use an ngIf for. So in this lesson, we are essentially going to use this input to use an ngIf inside a particular div to say that we're searching for a particular name once the name has a length property. And you may have seen this if you browse Google, and it tries to auto suggest things for you as you are typing into the search results. So one small thing here is that instead of passing just event, I've actually passed event.target.value. So instead of actually doing this in the actual component here and doing event.target.value, you can actually move it up into here. So I'm just demonstrating another concept of Angular and how flexible the template syntaxes are. Right, so let's get started with an ngIf. So let's assume that we want to create this div and only show it when the user has typed something in. So we can create some text in here saying searching for ... and then name. So we're initializing it with a value of Todd. We're going to create this as an empty string. Now an ngIf starts with an asterisk or a star if you want to call it that, and then we type ng and then if. So you can see here that we're using a Angular directive. So this is our first directive. So this is what we call a structural directive, because like we saw in the architecture video right at the beginning of this course, we can add directives to particular components or their templates. So we use this asterisk, and I'll explain why and actually show you the code that it generates under the hood so we can understand why Angular does this. So at the moment we've gotten rid of our forms module and we're using this value and we're binding the name. As soon as an input event happens, we're firing this handle change, we're passing the event.target.value down, and then we're reassigning this .name. So up here in this component, we have an ngIf. So we only want to show this div if the name actually has a length. And that's exactly what we can pass in. So we can do name.length. So when we actually start typing, because we're initializing it with an empty value, we won't actually see searching for ... However, when we start typing and it has a length, we can then start seeing this searching for. And you can imagine that this is used as some kind of search result or a type ahead. So over here in the browser, we have our input, and I go ahead and start typing top motto. So it says searching for top motto, and if I delete the whole thing, you can't see the searching for. So the ngIf is an easy toggle to display and hide content based on a particular condition. We can also add some more expressions. So we can say if the name.length is greater than 2. So let's go and try this out. So we can do T, O, D, and then it starts actually showing. So this gives you an example of the template expressions that you can actually bind in line to Angular's templates. So the next stage is actually understanding this asterisk, and this is actually really important. If you want to look at this in your spare time, you can do. It's not in the scope of the course because web components is an entirely new concept to the DOM. But essentially, web components has a specification where it has a template element. And you can go and try this yourself in plain HTML and JavaScript and look at the template element and the web component specification. So Angular basically sits on top of the web platform, meaning we can use things like Shadow DOM. So this template allows us to essentially create a particular template that Angular can then use to generate content from. So if you imagine we had this div, all this is doing is really putting the div inside a template, and then the asterisk can completely disappear, and we can take this ngIf and the name.length, and we can leave the div like this. So if you imagine that the template is a web component piece of HTML that could be used as a template elsewhere, or it can be used multiple times. And the asterisk here is simply sugar syntax for not having to type the word template yourself. So all this is really doing is square brackets and then ngIf, because we're using a property binding to evaluate the ngIf expression. and then it's going to do this name.length is greater than 2. So the actual check is on the template itself. So this is why you do not see the ngIf in the DOM if you wanted to inspect elements. So you just see the actual div itself. So this is the difference between using something like a property binding. So the template, it's actually using the property binding. However, here is just sugar syntax, so we don't have to write these template elements ourselves. Now, when we come onto the Pro course, we'll be talking about component encapsulation and Shadow DOM much further, which takes these concepts to the next level and shows you more of the power that Angular actually gives us via their web components. So let's dive across to the browser and we'll actually check both of these out because both of them will actually work identically. So as before, we can do 1, 2, and then on the third letter, you can see that both of the ngIfs have actually kicked in. We have the first one, which is using the template element, and the second one, which is using the sugar syntax with the asterisk. So that's how to use ngIf. You can pass it an expression, and it can evaluate based on that expression. It can either be a Boolean or evaluate to a truthy or a falsy value inside Angular.